Hi, I'm Virgil or Mordred, otherwise known as silksong, and if you had not guessed based on the masculine names combined with the sound of my voice, I am transgender. More specifically, I am a non-binary trans guy and use they, them, and sometimes he, him pronouns. However, in my day-to-day life, I am often gendered as female based on my appearance and voice. I am also a fan of Hollow Knight Silksong. It is an excellent game with challenging gameplay, beautiful art, and compelling characters. We'll come back to that in a couple of paragraphs. Now, imagine for a moment that I am a fictional character, perhaps in a video game. The narration, of course, refers to me with they, them pronouns, as do several other characters who know me well. However, the story does not pause and say, hey, this character is transgender. Why would it? It seems obvious enough. However, then some so-called lore analysts come crawling out of the woodwork with interpretations. Interpretations along the lines of, oh, if you look here, one of her brother's friends asked him about his sister, and she's his only sibling, so obviously she's actually a woman. Never mind that said brother calls them by the correct pronouns in the next text box. Or perhaps even, oh, in the Czech translation she uses the feminine grammatical gender when speaking in first person. The English version is just ambiguous. Yeah, for the record, I do use the feminine grammatical gender in Czech much of the time, for many complicated reasons, but mostly out of force of habit. It was how I was taught to speak, after all, and the lack of a proper gender-neutral pronoun in Czech. This does not make me any less non-binary, nor does it give you permission to use feminine terms for me in English. Now, let us return to Silksong. This video assumes you are already familiar with the controversy surrounding the character of Phantom. For those unaware, Phantom in Silksong was the silk-spun child of Grandmother Silk and the sibling of Lace, but unlike their sister, was at some point discarded and tasked to play the exhaust organ in Bylewater. They serve as the final boss of an alternative route through Act 1, allowing you to bypass the last judge's battle and the bell-ringing questline before it. In-game, there is little dialogue referring to them. However, in the Hunter's Journal, they are referred to with they-them pronouns. The only other place they could potentially be referred to is in a memory featuring them and Lace, with the dialogue, "Why us, sister?" It is unclear who is speaking to who. However, in certain other languages without easy gender-neutral language, Spanish and French are named on the wiki. I unfortunately do not presently have access to a full script for all languages, so as to check the others for myself. They are referred to as female. It is worth noting that this is not the case in all languages. The Italian goes out of its way to avoid using strongly gendered language, ultimately having Phantom refer to themselves with masculine terms, seemingly to follow the grammatical gender of their name. German supposedly also refers to them neutrally, and Russian uses alternating masculine and feminine terms. However, the wiki does not have a source for those, and as mentioned, I cannot easily check for myself. Ultimately, it is not supremely relevant. However, should I wind up going through the effort of finding and comparing all languages, I will elaborate on my findings in a pinned comment. Ultimately, my point remains the same. There was a time in early November wherein the wiki decided to use these heavily gendered languages over the English in which the game was written, citing a so-called translator they were in contact with, who supposedly had access to a translation guide, wherein Team Cherry specified which pronouns to use for characters should it be necessary. Supposedly, they could not cite this source directly lest their contact break their NDA. Ultimately, what this means is that for a period of time, Phantom was listed as female on the wiki. It has since been changed back in response to backlash, but many popular figures in the community, especially on the YouTube side of things, continue to follow this precedent, citing ambiguity in the original text based on the idea that the Hunter's Journal is not a reliable source for characters' genders. Even besides the fact that this is not necessarily true, which I will get into shortly, plenty of characters are gendered based on that very same Hunter's Journal referring to them with binary pronouns. This is accepted as unambiguous fact, which shows a certain double standard regarding non-binary identities, and that other translations hold the answer to this so-called ambiguity. The purpose of this video is to be a refutation of these ideas. First, to state firmly that no, actually, Phantom uses they-them pronouns, at least in English, and I have the citations to prove it, and secondarily to analyze the narrative of their character and prove that their identity makes sense in context and actively enhances the themes of the story. First, let us touch on the Hunter's Journal. Though this video is focused on Phantom, everything I say in this segment applies to any other characters gendered in this manner. There is a common argument that the Hunter's Journal is an inaccurate source. While it is true that Hornet sometimes refers to characters with they-them who are gendered elsewhere, for instance Sister Splinter, she writes only the lower notes of the Hunter's Journal, while the upper portions of the entries are seemingly written by an omniscient narrator. Having gone through all Hunter's Journal's entries for bosses and characters, there is only one case wherein the upper dialogue seemingly erroneously uses they-them, in Garmond and Zaza's entry, wherein they are referred to as a vigorous old knight and their noble companion. However, it could be argued this is referring less to the duo themselves and more so the archetypes they embody. In all other cases, it uses the correct gendered pronouns when it uses pronouns at all. Notably, in the case of Phantom, it uses they-them for them in the final sentence of their description, feeling almost tacked on at the end. This is entirely conjecture on my part, however it does feel somewhat intentional to me, given that 9 out of 10 times these upper descriptions are worded to avoid pronouns entirely, and this would be relatively easy to do here as well. It almost reads like Team Cherry deliberately left it in to establish that the omniscient narrator also uses they-them for Phantom, not just Hornet. Again, there is no real evidence for it, 'twas merely a thought I felt was worth sharing. Some argue that this was left as it was because of an oversight on Team Cherry's end, to which I say, in Silksong, the game which they spent actual years polishing? Enough years that Silksong for so long was synonymous with games that were never releasing? That? Silksong? What is more likely? That Team Cherry forgot their own character's gender, or that they're called a they on purpose, that this is the story they are trying to tell. It is worth noting that Grandmother Silk's other known children, the Weavers and Lace, are explicitly all female. While some might say this is a point against Phantom being non-binary, I have a different perspective. Hollow Knight has never been a game with a shortage of non-binary or genderless characters. However, in the most well-known instances, they are vessels or automata or otherwise always assumed genderless from creation. In other words, they are non-binary, but they cannot really be accurately called transgender. While this representation is nice, it is not typical of real-world non-binary people. The vast majority of us are initially assumed to be one of the two binary genders, raised as a boy or a girl, and, at least for the first part of our lives, occupy a man or woman-shaped role in the world. We do not spawn into existence as we are. Our society is binary, and we are born into that perception and placed into that box just as much as anyone else's. Being non-binary is something we must discover for ourselves, even for those of us who are lucky to know it is even possible, and many do not. Let me summarize Phantom's story for you again. They are the creation of Grandmother Silk, spun from Silk to be her child. They were ultimately abandoned by their mother, left discarded and fraying. It is never outright stated why they were abandoned, but let me say this. All of Grandmother Silk's other known children, including her perfect child Lace and the Weavers, are daughters. Phantom is not. Unlike their sister Lace, they wear a visible mask. Masks in Hollow Knight are a signifier of identity. If you wear a mask, you are a person. You are your own person. A mask is self-determination, a chosen face, a crafted identity. Phantom's mask is broken and damaged, even hindering them in combat, but they wear it regardless. In other words, Phantom chooses self-determination. Frayed and dying, they cling to the identity they choose for themselves. An identity they were potentially cast aside for. An identity beyond the confines of what they were spun to be. Beyond the confines of their mother's child. Beyond the confines of her daughter. This is not such a reach. Silksong is a game with heavy themes of gender, especially of womanhood. Is it so out there that it should deal with trans identity as well? Subtly, yes, but it is there. In a world of sapient bugs and angry gods, Phantom's story is not only a tragic one, but a very real one. A child raised by a controlling parent who treated them not as a person, but as her daughter, setting on them the expectation of being a perfect, obedient little girl, a silken doll who didn't do things like argue with her or leave her behind or question her judgment or object to her will. As they grew, they realized this role was ill-fitting and sought self-determination, but when their mother discovered this, they were rejected and cast out of what had been their home. Without the support of their family, they had only one means of self-determination left: to take their fractured identity in hand and choose a swift death on their own terms rather than a slow, faceless decline. It is a sad, bitter ending, but unfortunately not an unrealistic one. Phantom's story closely aligns with the lived experiences of many trans and non-binary individuals. Even if one is to assume Team Cherry did not intentionally wear them as textually transgender, the themes are there. I acknowledge that there is a possibility that in the future Team Cherry will come out and explicitly confirm that Phantom is not non-binary, but I deeply hope that they do not just out of selfish desire to be right or even the wish to see more characters like me, but also because it works narratively in a way that is so rarely done. It is rare that even stories so deeply connected to womanhood and self-determination so much as spare a glance to those like me, whose self-determination is shaped as rejecting their assigned gender outright. Phantom's story is one that hits so much harder when they are non-binary than it would if they were a cisgender woman, simply by nature of so much as acknowledging an experience that is so rarely acknowledged in these kinds of stories. I don't know how to end videos, but that is all I have to say on this topic for now. Should I think of anything more, it will be added to the pinned comment. Yeah.